What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? Matty here with another episode of Steelers Touching Under. On today's show, we are talking Darnell Washington. That's right, Darnell Washington, the Steelers draft pick in 2023 in the fourth round that they're able to go back and grab him. Sorry, third round, able to go and grab him by trading back in the draft. Omar Khan did a good thing there. He was rumored to be much higher in the draft, and his draft stock fell. A lot of that's due to unconfirmed reports about his knees. He's a bigger guy. He's 6'7". He's somewhere between 270 and 290 pounds. He's effectively an athletic tackle at tight end. A lot of talk about him in the offseason. A lot of hype around him last year. A lot of poor offensive coordination from Matt Canada. Saw Matt Canada punted. Really, all we saw out of Darnell was a lot of blocking. He had 7 receptions off 10 targets, barely used. And, a lot of that was put down to quarterback plays. There was a lot of hype around and a lot of hope and hype, the double H's that can be problematic at times around what he might be able to do in the red zone. And it should never eventuated. And so, Steel fans, we're hoping we can see something this offseason. It was talked about at mandatory mini camp. It was talked about at OTAs. A lot of players said, look at Darnell, look what he's doing. Russell Wilson seems to have got a bit of chemistry with him early on as well. And those are all really good things. I don't want to take away from that at all by doing this video. But I've been sitting there and I'm hopeful of what he can be. Just because you did something in college doesn't mean you didn't do something in college doesn't mean you can't do it in the NFL. But I've been trying to sort of think about who could he model himself off? Who could he use as an example to get better? And unfortunately, I didn't do that well of a result. One of the first things I was like, oh, well, how many receptions did Heath Miller get? Maybe he only had 30 in his first year and he got better. You think about the Cam Hayward example where he didn't play that well his rookie year, didn't get much time on the field. Well, I was wrong there. Heath Miller had 6 touchdowns. He had 52 receptions. He did really well from that perspective. Well, maybe it was 52 targets. Someone's going to pull it up, but that was one of the first things I saw. So I was like, bow. Then I thought, if I go and search among the league's players now, you're going to get all the guys that have been in there in their rookie year in Darnell's position. So that's not really going to tell us anything. So I actually looked up something a bit different. I went through a special tool called StatHead, which is a paid-for program with Sports Reference and Pro Football Reference. I managed to pull up something pretty interesting. But before I show you that element, I wanted to just bring everyone's attention back to what Darnell did in Georgia, because it's not like he was known as a receiving threat either in Georgia. Had some big plays, had some key plays, but never really, a major receiving threat. He had 7 receptions for 166 yards, right? So average of 23, big barnstorming runs in 2020. College football, very different with a guy that size. You're throwing the ball in space. Not that you don't do that in the NFL, but the defenses sort of sit there and it's your job to spot the gaps kind of effectively at quarterback in college football. And I'm dumbing it down a lot, but it is different to throwing guys open in the NFL. So you're probably giving the ball to a guy like Darnell in a lot of space. That's one thing. And you've seen that anyway. You can pull up the images of that. Then in 2021, he had 10 receptions in 11 games, so almost won a game, for another 154 yards, this time averaging 15.4. Obviously, 154 divided by 10, that's what it is. 1 TD this time, instead of no TDs in his freshman year in college. Then in his junior year in college, his final year before declaring in that draft process, an average of 16.2 yards per reception. He had 2 TDs. He had 28 receptions. So that's pretty good. Right. Unfortunately, they don't break out the targets here. I'm going off this. I'm not going off PFF. Their numbers are wrong in a lot of this stuff. I'm going off Sports Reference. That's who I trust. So he finished his career in college with 774 yards, 17.2 average, 3 TDs, all hunky-dory, right? No, obviously, rushing yards. How could you rush a guy that big? But played in a top college, played alongside Brock Bowers. So maybe that someone's already commented that as well. So he's not Cade Stover as well. He was not the receiving threat on that line. He was definitely much a blocking tight end. That's what he is. And that's what he was last year in the NFL as well. That's what he was. But my sort of thing, I'm sitting there and going, okay, well, moving back to the premise of when I started out the show, what could he be? What could he be over the course of his career? What if Arthur Smith can unlock something? Now, Arthur Smith with tight ends too, when you think about a Mecole Pruitt type guy, the guy's more of an H-back than a Darnell Washington. He's never had a Darnell Washington, so maybe he finds another gear. But to be honest, it's not like the tight end, unless they're a receiving tight end, because we've even saw it with Kyle Pitts, is going to necessarily do a heck of a lot when it comes to Arthur Smith's offense. Like, you know what? I'll pull up Kyle Pitts, and we'll have a quick look at him, because even though he's no Darnell, Kyle Pitts is, anything that Kyle Pitts has done, you can maybe perhaps expect that of Pat Freiermuth, but I would rather Pat Freiermuth do what Pat Freiermuth does. Kyle Pitts did get 1,000 yards in his rookie year, 356 in his second year. He only played in 10 games. And then last year he had 667. So it's not like he's the model guy that, Pat Freiermuth needs to be modeling his game off. Nor is it clear that, Arthur Smith's been able to scheme that guy as well. But, and a big caveat with Atlanta is they didn't have the quarterback. Like the Pittsburgh Steelers didn't have the quarterback last year either. They had quarterbacks. They didn't have the quarterback. And by the quarterback, I mean someone that's going to compete for a championship, even if it's a conference championship. All right. So, who does Darnell model his career off? Let's answer this question. So, I did a big criteria thing. I'm going to show you all of this. So I'm going to go through it so you can see, because people always correct me on trying to correct on different stats. So, 10 receptions or less in their first year of their career, because Darnell had 7, but he had 10 targets thrown his way. So we're going to go less than 10 receptions. And I could change that to targets, and we're going to have a look at that just to be clear. And then I went through, and there's different statistical filters that you can pick with this StatHead tool. I'm doing a lot of advertising for them, but they're an amazing tool. I love them. And I tried. Active wouldn't work, as I say, because you're going to pick up guys like Darnell. I went Pro Bowl, no one. All Pro, no one. And then Hall of Fame, and funnily enough, I found someone. Then I did this back to my caveat was back to the Super Bowl era starting in 1966. So there are 3 blokes in the NFL, believe it or not. I've never seen them before because this all happened. I was born in 1991, so it happened before my time. But you've got Dave Casper, Shannon Sharp, and Rayfield Wright all made the Hall of Fame. All made straight Hall of Fame, not an All-Pro, not Pro Bowls, funnily enough, having only had under 10 receptions. Now, interestingly, Shannon Sharp had 7 receptions in his rookie year for 99 yards. David Casper had 4 receptions for 26 yards, and Rayfield Wright had none. He did play in 10 games. So, and this guy's in 1967. I couldn't tell you what he did, who he blocked, what's going on. Shannon Sharp, again, is probably the most modern one you can think of. When you think of these 3, obviously, is by year, but probably the one that's going to fulfill most people's minds. Maybe a lot of Steelers fans out there from 90s, that have been watching, that are plus 45 years old, remember Dave Casper because he played on the Oakland team in 1974, but well before my time. So that sort of tells you the hurdle. And you know what? Why don't we do what I said before? We'll remove that statistical filter, and we'll do instead targets. They may not have all this data though. That's the only other thing too. You've got to be really careful here because sometimes the data only goes back so far. So let's see if we get any results for 10 target slots. None. Right? So this is what I mean. I searched all different things. So what does that say for Darnell? What that says for Darnell is he's going to have to set a standard. He's going to have to do something, right? Now, I'm not saying he's going to be a Hall of Famer. Remember when I compared it, I said it's that I couldn't pull up anyone that had made the Pro Bowl after only having less than 10 receptions at tight end in their rookie year. And no one had made or been an All-Pro either. Those 3 guys I mentioned, Casper, Sharp, and I think it was Greenfield. I just exited the window, but I think they were the blokes that were able to do it. They were able to do it to make the Hall of Fame, but they weren't able to do it, unfortunately, to, when it comes to, there was no one there that was able to do it to make the All-Pro and Pro Bowl, and those guys included. So it does put a really interesting sort of situation for Darnell. But having said that, I think if Darnell can get 30, 40 targets thrown his way across a 17-game season, and hopefully that's the case, even based off what they've already started using him in mandatory minicamp and OTAs, then I think it could be a really good year. The other thing I'll say is just because they don't use him in the preseason doesn't mean they'll use him in the season. He's the sort of guy you probably want to keep under wraps a little bit what he's doing, or a lot, and only do a little bit in the preseason. So you've got this X factor stuff. So teams, have to be really, really go wondering when they're thinking about how they're going to stop Darnell. If you let me know in the comments, what do you think about Darnell and what he might be able to do in 2024? I'm excited to see what he can do. Absolutely. It's just he's going to be trailblazing a new path when it comes to tight ends and what they can do in terms of trying to make Pro Bowls and All Pros, let alone even a Hall of Fame with under 10 receptions in his rookie year. As always, go Steelers.